we go. Got it. I need to get started with you this morning. I traded with Rabbi Goodman because I have to get to a doctor's appointment. So it'll be a shorter time together. I want to invite you to join together in the blessing for learning. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So good morning. Last time that we were together, we had just entered Kibbutz Nirim, which I started to tell you about because Cantor Aronoff and her husband Mel and I and my husband Ken volunteered there that day, one of the days that we were in Israel, and I started to tell you, and I will reiterate a little bit about what we saw and what we did at Kibbutz Nirim, and then I'll proceed to tell you what happened the rest of that day, because it was a very profoundly important day. So what I want to show you is a little bit of Kibbutz Nirim. So, yes. Can you see over there now? Okay. So what I wanted to show you is in an entrance to Kibbutz Nirim. We, of course, have what is all over the country, and now, unfortunately, unless something drastic happens over the next number of days, we'll probably be up there longer than we had hoped. But even going into the kibbutz has its hostages on the. So I don't want that. That's not where we're going right now. Hold on a second. So we are at Kibbutz Nirim. If you look beyond this at Kibbutz Nirim and you see the area that they have for planting, and they are now not doing very much agriculture because nobody lives at Kibbutz Nirim right now. But if you look beyond that, just beyond where you see a tower, that's Gaza. And here at this particular fence was where the terrorists were able to breach the fence. They tried to breach the fence enough to bring motor vehicles into Kibbutz Nirim, but they were unable to do that. So I just also want to show you, let's see. Here, if you take a look straight ahead, is one of the areas in which weaponry was used by the terrorists to try and shoot at buildings to destroy roofs so that they would collapse on people. What Kibbutz Nirim has done since that point is that it has reinforced every single one of its buildings with heavy metal, and this is Adele getting ready to show us her house that she's not allowed to live in now. I remember I told you about a woman who's very brave, who has been going through a number of these things. And she told us, I didn't take a picture of this because I thought it wasn't fair to her, but every one of the kibbutz houses has a window like to the kitchen, like in your house maybe, right? You look out into the garden or into the sidewalk that's outside of your house. But the problem was that on the day that the kibbutz was attacked, it made it all the easier for the terrorists to get in because they would just break your front window for your kitchen and climb in with all their weaponry. When we were there with Adele, they were just putting in heavy metal curtains, like to go on the front of your window, so that if you are being attacked, you have the capacity to be able to push a button somewhere else in the house and set metal down in front of all of the accesses to your house. So she was showing us about getting into her house, which I think was really very emotional for her because she can't live there and all of her things are there. So these are just so that you see in the background, you can see that all of their fruit trees are growing. You can see next to you that parts of gardens exist, but everything is growing wild because the things that they have to focus on now are not whether you have a beautiful front door garden, but whether you are protected enough when you move back. Okay? So I took a picture of masking tape because all I saw was masking tape the whole day to help them get ready for painting. So here we go. After we went to Nirim, and we spent a lot of time there, all of these things are from Nirim. This basically says here is where our kibbutz families had to fight for their lives. They have different things all over the kibbutz that they have written, and ways that they try to remember everything and everybody. So now let me take you to our next stop. I didn't really want to go, but Cantor Aronoff told me that we needed to, because being at Kibbutz Nirim for all of those hours was enough. Like, it was so wrenching. It's wrenching to see somebody's nameplate like you can have on your house. You go to Israel and you pick up a Hebrew nameplate and it says Mishpachat Cohen or something like that. This house that we were in, they were Rabinovitz, and Rabinovitz people I'll never meet, that thank God are alive, but it was just the strangest, most difficult experience. So the next place that we went was Nova, where the rock and roll music festival was just coincidentally happening, and hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of mostly young adults were killed or taken into hostage situations. I'm trying to make that bigger. This gives you an example. If you look around, are you seeing beyond Noam, the person I took a picture of? If you see all of those signs, do you? And all of those trees, those are all posted at Nova to be able to have people walk through and learn about each and every person who was there, who was killed or kidnapped that day. This is what a number of people did at the bottom of those signs. And in a place where there aren't words, it's okay to remain silent. So I'd like to show you a little bit more. Can you see it here? You can get a better idea of the picture of what we were walking around in Nova. Now, I don't know whether you saw pictures of Nova or any of those films of people trying to escape Nova, whatever you have or have not seen. I thought it was a desert. It looked deserty to me. I thought that in the midst of the desert they had this music festival. But really it's a park. It's a park about 3 minutes away from Kibbutz Nirim. It's a park about 3 minutes away from Kibbutz Sad, which I'm going to talk to you about next. This was in the middle of the areas in the south where all these kibbutzim were, and it was just a tragic fluke that they were there that day. They have, if you can see, there are trees there, but no trees that were big enough or solid enough to hide behind. They tried all different kinds of ways of hiding, and unfortunately or fortunately, we saw all those different kinds of places. From the Coca-Cola sales stand to some of the miklat, the places that were supposed to be safe rooms, which obviously weren't if people could walk in and just shoot you. So this is Nirim. I mean, this is Nova, and it is beautifully done.
Yeah, but I have to say it's interesting to see your pictures, because I was there a year prior. And
You take this mic and say that.
it's interesting to see your pictures because there's so much more planted there now. I was there a year earlier, and there weren't as many flowers or budding trees like you saw over there. Excuse me. And I had a very interesting experience of a young man, obviously Chassid, with a long coat and dark socks and shoes and a guitar. And he was playing, let me see if I can.
Oh, I don't know how to screen that for you.
I don't either, but
You can always pass your phone around. So what you're hearing now is that even though this music festival was really mostly for people who were not tremendously religious, they were there for a rock concert. And so, but despite that, the responses of people to this horrible situation is that no matter who they are, they come. And they try to memorialize all these people. What you're looking out there is Hirsch Goldberg Poland's memorial. And I took a picture of that because he's so well known as an American Israeli who was there. But the other place that I don't know if it existed when Joette was there is they have a whole tent synagogue there. And the whole tent synagogue, they make sure that there are people there every day, Shacharit morning, Mincha afternoon, and Mariv evening, to say the correct prayers, to have the correct service for the day, in order to share the importance of the memorial of the people at this spot. So it turned from a hipster rock concert to something that the entire Israeli citizenry embraces and tries to be there to remember, which is really a lovely thing. So I don't want to overdo these pictures that I send to you. So we're going to move on a little bit. And I'm going to take you to Kibbutz Sa'ad, but Kibbutz Sa'ad I did not take pictures of, and I will tell you why. So you can just have those up there. Kibbutz Sa'ad is a kibbutz that did not get breached by the terrorists. I think I may have told you this, but I don't think I got as far as Kibbutz Sa'ad. So we went to Nova. We spent a long time there. We walked around and just tried to take in the horror and the remembrance. After that, we hopped in the car to go to Kibbutz Sa'ad, which was about 5 minutes away. Kibbutz Sa'ad was a miracle because at Kibbutz Sa'ad, the terrorists started to try and breach the front gate that was locked because it's Shabbat. It's a religious kibbutz, mostly of young people. But the gate is closed on Shabbat, so nobody will enter with a vehicle. But when the terrorists started firing, all the men at the kibbutz and some of the women got their weaponry and started firing at them. And they still weren't able to get in, but they were firing weapons at residents from outside the gate. They were running out of ammunition. The kibbutz members were running out of ammunition, and it was getting very terrifying. And as we all know, it took a while for the army to get anywhere. However, in front of Kibbutz Sa'ad, just randomly, a tank drove up. This was a tank that was completely staffed by Israeli soldier women. The tank got there just in time when they were running out of the ammunition, and the women in the tank managed to eliminate all the terrorists that were left there. Nonetheless, even though nobody's home had more than like a couple bullets in it, and everybody, thank God, was safe, everybody needed to move out of Kibbutz Sa'ad. It was the government's mandate for people to not be in those kinds of areas where they would be in potential danger again. So you heard so many complaints from people. I wonder who's doing that sound behind us. Oh, okay. Anyway, a lot of people were upset because the army didn't get there in time. The thing was that there was a whole bunch of very difficult communication. Many of the communications happened tragically, with children who were at Nova, for example, calling their parents on their cell phones saying, "I'm going to get killed, get the army here." But it took a really long time for them to actually make sure that all of these troops were on their way to the right places, because everything was in chaos. And it all happened very, very, very quickly. So one of the reasons it happened quickly at Nova is that everybody was outside. One of the reasons it happened quickly at a kibbutz like Nirim, which wasn't even the worst that was hurt, is because I told you last week they didn't have locks on any of their safe rooms, remember? I said no locks because they never expected that kind of breaching. They expected rockets or something. And they didn't want somebody to have a panic attack or a heart attack and not be accessible by an ambulance. So I told you they're changing that. I'm not going to take a lot of comments. Is it a question, Zisel?
there's something called the fog of war. In war, you don't know what's happening.
Can you say it again, Cecil?
You asked me to do rapid.
I know, but clearly, loudly.
Okay. There is something in warfare called the fog, F-O-G, the fog of war. Because when there is war, there's confusion. And that causes casualties.
That was very helpful. Thank you. Okay, so Sod was evacuated. They didn't live there for a very long time. People now live there again. Not everybody has come back. Not everybody has come back yet. Not everybody might come back ever. But Cantor Aronoff's niece and nephew on her husband Mel's side live in Kibbutz Sod with their 3 children. They are Mel Aronoff's brother's children, and Mel Aronoff and his brother and sisters grew up here in Los Angeles. His brother made Aliyah. The kids are there in Israel, and they live at Kibbutz Sod. So we went to have dinner, pizza, and to sit and talk with them in a normal situation, in a cute little house that this young family has at Kibbutz Sod. And while you're sitting there having pizza and a glass of wine and talking to 3 little kids and a family, there's no possibility of not saying, oh my God, things could have been so different with this family. So Mel's niece told us what it was like to move back in. Now, in kibbutzim, I think I mentioned this, but I'm not sure. In kibbutzim, children are allowed to run free. It's not like it is in the San Fernando Valley. They're living on the kibbutz. It is a closed neighborhood, big neighborhood, but it's a closed neighborhood. Many people know who other people are who are living in the kibbutz. So children, even small children, are allowed to go out and play. They're allowed to walk themselves to school. They're allowed to go do whatever they want in their home kibbutz. The parents had to get together when they moved back to the kibbutz because they said, this horrendous thing has happened to all of us. Should we be allowing our children any longer to run free? What do we do about that? So all the parents got together, and in the end, they decided they were not going to change their children's life experience. They have a lot of guards at Kibbutz Sod. I don't think that they will ever, any of these places, not have a lot of guards. But they made a decision based on what they thought was the ultimate health of their little children, which is not to make them live terrified lives. And then we had a conversation about it. And the parents said, we are trying to learn the same thing we are trying to teach our children. We are trying to learn that we must never live terrified lives. If we live terrified lives, that will be the end of our people, the end of our country, the end of all the things that we do that are meaningful and that are important for us to have the kind of life that we want to have in our land.
Rabbi, most of these kibbutz do something, have a major thing like agriculture or manufacturing or what have you. What does Sod do or known for?
Well, all kibbutzim are different than they used to be back in the day. People have their own houses. People have their own jobs. People come and go. Some people who live on a kibbutz are not actually members of the kibbutz. But they do a lot of agriculture at Sod. All of those places, they are still extremely proud of their crops. They show how they have tried to keep them whole. I think Sod also manufactures something, but I'm not sure what it was. I have to tell you, I didn't talk to her about that, but we can look it up. And so I wanted to share this about Sod to you because I think that this is definitely Israeli cities. If you go on if you are on any social media like Instagram, you can go to look up Israel Walks, and it's all Tel Aviv and what's going on in Tel Aviv in real time on that particular day. It's beautiful. I think I told you this, but if you were in Tel Aviv, because I showed you things, if you're in Tel Aviv, you have no clue whatsoever that there is war. Nothing. Because people are out, people are walking. I told you all of those things. And then they go back to their units. But at the kibbutzim, they're trying to do that as well. And that they don't live there yet, but they are redoing all their kibbutzim. They're making sure they have what they need there, and they are pledging. Oh, there. Okay. Sod is one of Israel's largest producers of carrots, with a quarter of the country's production. Other crops include potatoes, avocados, almonds, and citrus fruit. Sod has a large dairy farm and a poultry farm. And the industries include Saifan, a plant that manufactures plastic shrink wrap, and Popli, which supplies popcorn products and pet food. And it also has a fashion outlet called Kav Lekav, which sells clothes for men, women, and children, and Abi Noam Jewelry, which produces handmade jewelry in sterling silver, a graphic design studio, and an auto service center. A kibbutz in modern Israel is not the same as it used to be, but Adele at Nirim has lived on her kibbutz for more than 40 years. Her children at Kibbutz Nirim lived in the children's house. That's the way kibbutzim used to do it in the old days. They would have people watching the children so that the adults could do the agriculture or the animals or whatever it is. People only saw their children a couple of times a day. If a woman was nursing, the children's house would summon her to come in to feed her baby. But children were raised a lot separately from their parents. You remember hearing this back in the day, right? None of that exists now. Children are raised in their parents' homes. They go to school. Their parents do whatever, making dinner. They live with their families. And yet it's still a kibbutz, but as you can hear from what I read, it's very different. Different people have different skills, and they share those skills. Are we good? Last kibbutz, Kibbutz Sa'ar, a horribly destroyed kibbutz. Very close Tsar. It was attacked terribly. We walked the kibbutz with the father of these three little kids, who is in the Israeli army training. He trains young kids who are a year out from the army, who have a lot of potential, and they move into very strong places in the army hierarchy once they're done with saying, yes, I will do a mechina, a preparatory year for the Army. So we met all those kids. They're 17. And they have a soul that wants to do the best for their country. So they're already there studying. They're studying at that kibbutz, and the kibbutz was attacked so violently that large numbers of people died. We saw the area in which the fighting went on, which of course is cleaned up. We saw the areas where the children's playthings were, but now they're all piled up in just junk situations because they haven't had time. We saw how close Gaza City was from that kibbutz. I'm looking for the picture, but here, maybe this is it. Yeah, no, that's not it. That's another Gaza part. That's my husband standing there. From the kibbutz, you can see Gaza City. Gaza City can fire rockets or even not terribly powerful rockets into this kibbutz and other kibbutzim. I don't know, it was terrifying to me to be standing there and knowing that that's so close. And that kibbutz really, really, really was harmed. But those pre-army kids and their teachers are living there in houses, and they know why, and they want to be there. And we talked to them, and they said, we want to be here because we want the next thing that is said about this kibbutz to be young adults in Israel want to be there for their country. And we are here now. It was so moving. It was impossible not to cry. But they're not crying. They're laughing and sipping Coke and having a dance with the people that they're learning with and talking to their teachers. That day left me with an understanding more deep than I could ever say about how beautiful our homeland is. Why don't you ask it since you're sitting? Oh, okay.
My question is in thinking about the description that you're giving is very moving. And I was just wondering what's going on among the ultra-Orthodox communities, if you know.
Israel always has trouble with some aspects of the Orthodox, the ultra-Orthodox, not Orthodox. Modern Orthodox and regular Orthodox Jews who are not at the extreme, they're in the army. They're in the army. They make sure that they take their Torah into the field with them. Everybody wants that. You would not believe how many young men in Tzahal who are not actually really religious people insist on putting on tefillin every day. They see it. They're told the story, which is real, about the fact that the reason we wear tefillin, people used to wear it all day long, when no matter what they were doing, in order to remind themselves that they were strong, that if they were right-handed, their left hand was even strong, and the other way around. So these soldiers really want to, those are either religious or moderately religious or not even religious. Everybody is joining. They join in Kabbalat Shabbat services. It is a wonder to watch that they're together. Now, the Haredim are a different story. They are being required to send a certain amount of men into the army. And this week alone, they caught one of those young men at the airport trying to leave the country so he would be able to escape his draft. Now, I don't know how you possibly call yourself a religious and honest person if that's what you do when you are asked to take care of, if the country's been taking care of them with money forever, and now the country wants the help of those people. But let me say something else. There are also a moderately large number of Haredi young men who have joined the army, and it is much to their personal detriment, but they are doing it anyway and proudly, because their families and their rabbis say, if you go do that, don't bother to think that you're going to make it anywhere in our community after you come back. And they say, it's not just one or two people, it's a number of men who say, all right, that's the way it's got to be. We are needed, and we're going, and they go. So we can't judge everybody. You're a member of Chabad in Burbank. Some of the Israeli-born young men went back. So they didn't have the current training, but they became guards and volunteers, and now they are training them. Let me be absolutely clear. The people who are telling their people not to go into the army are not Chabad at all. Chabad is a Zionist organization. Chabad people do take responsibility for Israel, and a number of people who are Chabad in Israel, they're in the army. These are not the people that we are speaking of. I have to go because my doctor told me I have to go. Yes, Lois, last comment.
I'm just wondering, what is it about the ultra-Orthodox that allows them to say you cannot go?
What is it about the ultra-Orthodox that allows them to say you cannot go? Well, some of those ultra-Orthodox Jews, Neturei Karta is a very small group, but they don't believe in Zionism at all. They will parade with Hamas supporters because they don't think that the state of Israel should exist, because it isn't people who will create the state of Israel. It is the Mashiach, the Messiah. And until we have the Messiah, nobody should have a land. So that's a very small group of people. Then you have the people who are really Haredim, who believe that their only responsibility in life is to learn, to study. And they look at that as being a protection for all the rest of the stupid Jewish world that doesn't necessarily do that. I put in stupid, I shouldn't. That is their viewpoint. So, in many of those communities, they put up with Israel because Israel supports them, but they don't actually feel any kind of, yeah. So I have to go, and thank you for having me here early today. You have a little bit longer of a break than you thought you were going to, but Rabbi Goodman is on his way, and you'll have a wonderful class.
Let me say a couple of things. You go ahead. Okay, so my sister, may she rest in peace, made Aliyah in the early 1980s. She, excuse me, she married there and has 6 children. She lives, and her husband's still there. He lives on a religious moshav between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Of my 6 nieces and nephews, they run the gamut from modern Orthodox to ultra right wing. So my oldest niece's husband, who is in his 40s, he still does miluim, his army service, every year. And after October 7th, he was called up. Now, his unit ended up going to the south as guards because they're too old to do the fighting, and they're not trained for that. So they were guards to many of the communities in the south that are situated near Gaza. My ultra Orthodox niece lives in one of those communities in the south. It's called Tifrach. On October 7th, there were Hamas fighters outside the gates of their community, and I didn't quite understand how, but because it was Shabbat and Chag, they were unaware of everything that was going on. There were Hamas fighters who did not breach their gates, but they didn't find out until Saturday night what had happened. So, and when I was there last year and I visited her, their community is going on as it had before. The attitude of those communities who are learning, my niece's husband learns, is that by their learning, they are taking care of our souls. They say the soldiers who fight are protecting the land and taking care of people's physical safety, but they are taking care of spiritual needs. So that's their attitude. So it's interesting that even within my own family, I have modern Orthodox and every grade in between, all the way to ultra. One of my nephews was called up into the army. He's in his 30s, but he was a mashgiach, a kashrut supervisor in the army, and he lives in the north, and they assigned him to bases in the north. And this is before the fighting in Lebanon started, and so he was only called up on days when the soldiers were at the base, because they didn't need they didn't need his supervision in the kitchen if there weren't any soldiers there. So he was called up sporadically on an as-needed basis. I think that now he's done being called up. So, you know, I look at them and they all love each other and get along, and yet they are all at these different levels of observance within the Orthodox world. And I mean, I love all of them, and I'm very happy to see them, and I just, you know, I managed to comport myself in a way that makes them comfortable. So I have two nieces who wear pants, so if I'm at their house, I can wear pants. My other nieces don't, it's only skirts, so I only wear skirts when I go there because I just want them to be comfortable with me. And I don't want to make them feel embarrassed. So anyway, so it's, excuse me, it's wonderful to see within one family how they can all manage this.
It sounds very Jewish to me. It sounds very Jewish.
Best T-shirt in the world. Best T-shirt in the world.
I can understand why. It's a lovely car. Yeah. Yes, of course. Of course.
Absolutely.
I know.
I agree. I agree.
Just a curious, Rabbi. There is a city in Belarus, perhaps to the southeast of Minsk. It's called Pinsk. You're aware of it. Good.
I read it. I read that.
Okay.
Very nice. Yes.
And my mother especially, and my father to a degree, but my mother especially, lived like between Minsk and Pinsk. My grandfather had a farm there.
Wonderful.
And mother's father had a farm there.
Shall we get started?
No. No. All right. Good morning, everyone. So today we're going to go on a little excursion to Belarus. And so the first question that we are going to ask is, well, I know I've heard that word before, but if you ask me to tell you where it is, I have no idea. So let's look. Here's where it is. It is located on the southeast corner, basically, of Russia. And it is underneath Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. It is right above the Ukraine and just to the east of Poland. That's where Belarus is. And Belarus doesn't really become Belarus until much later in history. But we will refer to it at the moment as Belarus, and then when we get to when it becomes Belarus, we'll talk about it. Originally, it is part of territory that belongs to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. What is a duchy? Rosalie says? It's headed by a duke. What's headed by a duke? Grand Duchy is an area of territory that is run by a duke. That's a duchy, basically.
Just as a curiosity, some of the nobility, like dukes, they had land associated with them. Some, like a marquis, didn't have land. They were courtesans. They had status in the court. The dukes had the money.
Right. So during medieval times, as Cecil correctly pointed out, nobility basically owned land. Then there were people who were just under nobility, and then you had the peasants who weren't allowed to own land. I mean, part of how you became rich and became a noble, and your hierarchy within the nobles was how much land did I own, right? And so we see the same today in real estate moguls, right? It's like, how much real estate do I own? Then that makes them way up at the top. All right, so originally, the area that we are calling Belarus today belonged to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which was run by the Grand Duke of Lithuania. And the first Jews come over to Belarus probably sometime in the 8th century. The 8th century is what years? 700s, 700 CE. Okay, what's happening in the world around 700, 600 CE? Say again, Rosalie. Muhammad, very good. The rise of Islam is the big event that happens around 600 CE. So we're talking about 100 years after Muhammad, and Islam is spreading rapidly throughout the world. What else happens in 600 in the Jewish world? The Babylonian Talmud, the editing of the Babylonian Talmud has come to a close. Remember that in our tradition, there are two Talmuds. The Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, and the Babylonian Talmud. The Mishnah is edited in 200 CE by Judah Hanasi. Then for another 200 years, the Gemara is edited into the Jerusalem Talmud until 400 CE. And then for another 400 years, until 600, it's edited into the Babylonian Talmud. Let me explain that. So the Mishnah is what? What is the Mishnah? Laws. Very good, Joette. It is a set of kind of short laws governing all aspects of Jewish life in the land of what we now call Israel. What then happens is the rabbis begin to debate those laws. And they say, well, is this the law everywhere? Is this the law in all cases? Are there any exceptions? Millions of questions that the rabbis ask. Brilliant questions, to try to sort out what's going on. Those discussions are recorded for the next 200 years in the Jerusalem Talmud. These are the rabbis who were in Palestine. And then for another 400 years, these were the rabbis who were in Babylonia. Both Talmuds are authoritative, but we generally use the Babylonian Talmud because it has a better edit. It had 200 extra years to be edited and condensed and put together. So we generally use what we call the Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud. All right. It's the same way that the Supreme Court takes up laws in the Constitution or rules from the Constitution. Constitution says this, 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 and this. And then the Supreme Court comes in, people come in and they put a case to the Supreme Court and they say, well, Supreme Court, does that sentence mean this, 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 and this? Or does it mean this? And the Supreme Court comes in and has their rulings. There's a majority ruling, a minority. You know how this works. The rabbis did the same thing. A majority ruling by the rabbis and a minority ruling from the rabbis. Gary. Were the rabbis as politicized as the Supreme Court is in history? I'm not sure politicized is the right word, but it is true that from the beginning you had more conservative rabbis and you had rabbis who were more willing to be more liberal on the rulings. We know that the House of Shammai and the House of Hillel produced very important discussions. Shammai, a very brilliant rabbi, very much more conservative. Hillel, very brilliant rabbi, much more on the progressive side. And they had important discussions in the same way that, quite honestly, before the last 15 to 20 years, we did have two parties in our politics who were respectful of each other, who disagreed, but they had substantive discussions, they had compromises, and each side had important things to say. They worked together to try to solve problems. That's not the case, we all know right now. For whatever reasons, we won't go into politics. But it was the same thing with the rabbis. Some were more conservative, some were more liberal. Yes?
I wouldn't call politicize. I think it was more like polemics. That they had their differences.
Zisel, what did you say?
Not talking into the mic?
Yes, you must talk into the mic.
Okay. Now, talking to the mic, I say that it wasn't really politicized, but it was polemics. They came from different viewpoints.
All right. So the first Jews come to this area around the 8th century. And, hang on. Good question. Coming. And these Jews engaged mostly with trade, with Lithuania and other Baltic cities. Now, they came basically in two waves from two different places. The first wave, the older wave, the 8th century Jews, probably came from the east and the south, from here. From what was Babylonia, from Palestine, and from the Byzantine Empire. So, what is here on our map? Think Thanksgiving. Yes, Turkey is here. Absolutely, Rosalie. Good job. Turkey is here, which means that Israel, Palestine, Babylonia, all these places are where? Here, right? Okay. So the first Jews probably moved to Belarus from these areas between the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea. They are coming up into Belarus. Yes, they came by land. The second set of Jews, which is the much, much larger migration of Jews into Belarus, comes from the west, mostly from Germany. And Germany is here. Germany is there. North, mid Europe. And so they come in the 12th century. The 12th century are what years? The 1100s. Very good. What's happening in the 1100s in Europe that would cause the Jews to leave? The Crusades. Excellent. The first crusade starts when? Approximately 1100. Approximately 1100. And then there are a number of crusades after that. And we know that the crusades were particularly brutal for Jews. The Crusaders, their goal was what?
To rescue Christ's sepulchre from the Mohammedans or Muslims.
Okay. To liberate Jerusalem from the Muslims, right. Because remember that after Islam Islam is on the rise, it goes after the Holy Land and it conquers Jerusalem. Saladin conquers Jerusalem, and then they lose it, and then they conquer it again. So the goal of the Crusaders was to liberate Jerusalem from Muslim rule. All right. Along the way into Jerusalem, the Crusaders met many Jewish communities along the way, and they decimated the communities. They saw the Jews as infidels, like the Muslims, and they massacred Jews all the way along the way, and Jews committed mass suicide along the way as well, in order to not be subject to the massacre of the Crusaders. And they wanted to convert them to Christianity. Yes, that was also in the mix. Remember that during the Middle Ages, Jews were blamed for killing Jesus. And for the Black Plague, very good, and for a number of maladies in Europe. And Christians believed that that Jews were wrong in that they would not accept the new agreement, the New Testament, brought by Jesus to the world. And Jews were always and are always of the opinion, even to this moment, clearly, they have their agreement, whatever. It's not ours. Moses had his agreement with God. God and Moses got it right the first time. There was no change to that agreement. Okay. It's an important point. So So that is our position throughout history. Moses got it right the first time with God. God didn't change his mind and send a new agreement, a new covenant to the world. The Christians say they did, and then Islam comes along in 600 and says we have a newer agreement even than Christianity. And then the Baha'i come along after the Muslims and say we have the newest agreement. So one is called progressive revelation, that God's revelation gets more authoritative as you go through the ages, or our position is it's static revelation. God got it right the first time, he didn't change his mind, that's it. And it wasn't until 1965 with Nostra Aetate that Christianity relinquishes its idea that Jews should be subject to the new covenant, the New Testament. Their position in 1965 is Jews have their covenant, we have our covenant, and let them be. Jews didn't kill Jesus. So that was a big deal in 1965 with Nostra Aetate. Okay. So the later stream comes from Germany, and they are fleeing the Crusades. Also remember that, so we're in the 12th century, so we're in the 1100s, and the subsequent centuries, the 1100s, the 1200s, the 1300s, things happen in Europe. The Jews are expelled from England in 1290, and they don't get to come back until 1656 under Oliver Cromwell. They're expelled from England for a very long time. Then the Jews are expelled from France in 1306 to 1350. They went to the mainland and they went east. So England and France are here. These Jews went east. Many of them went to Germany and the Netherlands. Remember, Hamburg was considered the New Jerusalem for a while. Say again? Amsterdam, yes. Hamburg and Amsterdam. Amsterdam especially, was considered the New Jerusalem, and Jews went there. These Jews were speaking Yiddish, and the nobles invited them to come eastward to set up a mercantile economy, especially nobles in Poland. Okay, so what is a mercantile economy? One based on trade, Gary says. That's exactly right. A mercantile economy is an economy based on trade. What were the economies of these countries prior to that? Agricultural, absolutely. So if you wanted your country to rise in wealth and prestige and power, everyone saw very quickly that you had to go to a mercantile economy, one based on trade. Who was good in trade? The Jews. They were able to negotiate weights and measures with lots of different civilizations. They had experience keeping the books, accounting. That was very, very important. You had a lot of uneducated people in those days. They didn't know how to keep the books. They didn't know how to do accounting. We did. Not all of us, clearly, but many of us did. And they had the language, yes. Correct. They had the language to communicate with each other throughout the world. Remember that after Islam takes over and spreads pretty quickly, I mean, all things considered, throughout the ancient world, then we've talked about this a number of times, you had Jews who found themselves living under Christian rulers in Europe and living under Muslim rulers in what we now call the Middle East. And Christians and Muslims wouldn't talk to each other. But Jews lived in both Christian lands and Muslim-controlled lands, and Jews had a common language. They had a common language in Hebrew. Now, remember, Hebrew wasn't spoken as a modern spoken language then. But Jews absolutely could communicate to each other in the Hebrew for weights and measures, numbers, letters. And so Jews from Europe could communicate with Jews from the Ottoman Empire and the Middle East. So Jews were very much in demand. And the nobles wanted them. In 1315, Grand Duke Gedemnus comes to the throne, and he induces the Jews to spread out. In other words, he's really happy that the Jews are there, and they are turning this area that we are calling now Belarus into a more mercantile, trade-driven economy. And he says, good, I like you guys. Go there. I'll give you this land. I'll give you that land. I'll give you that land. Go work your magic in those lands. And the Jews were very, very thankful upon his death. I mean, they were weeping and they were calling him just the greatest guy in the world. But he gave them property and he gave them influence. And in return, they helped the area develop. Now, that's clearly not all Jews, right? Some Jews were still in poverty, and there were many Jews who were ignorant of Judaism, but many Jews did thrive at this time. After 1370, so remember, the Jews are let back into France in 1315. After 1370, the Jews in Poland, which is right next to Belarus, began to have a worse situation than they had had. The Roman Catholic Church began to assert itself, and their influence over the population strengthened. And so the Roman Catholic Church would be a problem for Jews because... Say again? Yeah, absolutely. Because all of the claims that Christians were making, that we killed Jesus and we were responsible for the calamities like the Black Death, these were driven by the Catholic Church. Now, it is true that some popes along the way condemned this behavior. But by and large, the popes and the populace, for sure, believed that Jews were the source of all the problems.
I wanted to point out that historically, a few hundred years before that, the Roman Empire came to an end, and they were they didn't believe in God, as we see. They believed in what the Romans believed in, and it became a religious political struggle between Christianity and Judaism, because there was this mass of humanity that didn't have any religion, that all of a sudden felt the need for religion, and a struggle started right there. Jews on one side and Christians on the other, and it's been going on for centuries.
True, except we're always in the minority, right? When were we in the majority? In our dreams. That's funny. In our dreams. We were in the majority at one point. When was that?
Way back.
Way back.
Way back, yes.
Good. Say again. First temple. Yes. Okay, very good. So, look, in Jesus' time, were we a majority in the area or a minority? Majority, definitely. We were definitely the majority population, the majority religion in the area, for sure. It isn't until Christianity begins to spread and Jews go into diaspora in a large way, and then Islam comes along, that we are no longer the majority religion in that area. But we were at that time. Yes.
I like to point out that in the very, very early times of Christianity, in order to be a Christian, you had to be a Jew first. And then I think it was Paul who changed that,
Okay, so very good. So let me just make a quick statement or two about this, and then you know what? I'll devote a class to this because it's super duper 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 interesting. So when Jesus was preaching to his followers, he was a Jewish rabbi preaching to Jews. There really wasn't anything at all that he said that wasn't Jewish. He was preaching Judaism to a bunch of Jews. It isn't until afterwards that the movement begins to redefine itself. They were called the Nazarenes because they were following Jesus of Nazareth. So there was a movement, and they were called the Nazarenes, and they were Jews, practicing what they felt was Judaism for the time. It went against what the high priest was teaching and normative Judaism was teaching in Jerusalem at the temple, and that became a big problem, so Jesus is turned over, the Romans execute, we know what happens. And as Cecil correctly pointed out, then Paul formulates Jesus' teachings into a homogeneous set of teachings that explain that Jesus' death atones for human sin. And that was the reason why Jesus came and why there was a second covenant and etc. And so then, by then, the groups of Jews following him, the Nazarenes, had moved around to different areas. And they were writing to Paul saying, look, I don't really know what to do here. You know, how do we navigate this? We're Jews, but what do we do about this and this and this? And Paul said, look, you don't have to keep kosher. You don't have to observe Shabbat. You don't have to circumcise. I'm sure that made many Jewish mothers happy. And then, of course, the final state comes along where Paul says, look, you don't even really have to believe in the Torah anymore. What you have to believe in is is that Jesus was the Messiah and that you will be saved through him. And that's when many Jews said, I don't think so. I'm not going with that. That doesn't work for me. And the movement split. And what ended up happening was the new people in the movement were Gentiles. And it became a Gentile Christian movement. The Nazarenes then kind of went on, but they weren't accepted by Jews and they weren't accepted by Christians. So they had a real tough time. But that's how basically the movement becomes Gentile, becomes a Christian movement. Okay. So in 1495, for a short time, Jews are expelled from Lithuania for the same reasons that they were hated throughout Europe. In 1569, the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania unite. So now you have this territory here all together as one united territory. And Jews basically did pretty well during this period. It was generally a good period for Jews. And so we're talking 1569. Less than 100 years later, we get the Khmelnytsky massacres. And Bogdan Khmelnytsky was a Cossack leader who rampages through basically the Ukraine and massacres over 6,000 Jews. He massacred other peoples as well, but Jews by far were the most numerous of the peoples he massacred. He hated Jews. And what was going on? Who were the Cossacks? Okay. Russian soldiers.
Well, they came from the steppes of Ukraine.
Right.
The original.
So, a Cossack is an ethnic moniker. The Cossacks were Eastern Slavic Christians, and they were semi-nomadic people, and they agreed to work with the Commonwealth, the leaders of the Commonwealth of Poland and Lithuania, until they didn't. And then they wanted more of the right to rule themselves. And so Bogdan Khmelnytsky stages an uprising against the Commonwealth, against the people for whom he was working to try to gain more autonomy. The Cossacks are disbanded after World War II. There are no more Cossacks after World War II. Basically, they were there to carry out the will of the rulers. But then, as I said, they wanted more rights of hegemony, and so they rebelled. They were, in large part, a military group. Yes. In 1791, Catherine the Great comes to the throne. And Catherine the Great establishes the Pale of Settlement. Now, we've all heard that term before, the Pale of Settlement. And Belarus, the area that we now call Belarus, took up approximately 20% of the area of the Pale of Settlement. So the area of the Pale of Settlement was here, on eastern Russia, the eastern borders of Russia. And it comes into existence because Poland is partitioned 3 times. And Catherine the Great is the recipient of new territory once Poland is partitioned. And lots of Jews lived in Poland. Why? Because, as we just talked about, the Polish rulers asked them to come there to establish a mercantile economy. So there were lots of Jews in Poland. So all of a sudden now Catherine the Great annexes territory with lots of Jews in it. Now, if that doesn't sound familiar, it should. Because when Hitler rampages through Eastern Europe, he conquers Poland, and what does he do? He inherits the continent's largest population of Jews. And so Catherine the Great has to figure out, what am I going to do with these Jews? In exactly the same way, with disastrous consequences, that Hitler says, what am I going to do with all these Jews? Remember, the final solution, the concentration camps, weren't really something that was seriously discussed until Hitler captures Poland. And he ran out of other options. Remember, Hitler's first option, he said, I want to make life so bad for them they're going to leave. That was plan A. And they didn't leave. Then some plan Bs came along. Well, let's establish Madagascar as an island and we'll ship them to Madagascar. But Britain controlled the seas in those days, so that wasn't an option. And even if it had been an option, Madagascar is very big, but it still isn't big enough for all the Jews who were on the continent of Europe. And then all of a sudden, once Hitler annexes, takes over, conquers Poland, then he's got the largest concentration of Jews in Europe, and he has no idea what to do. And then the idea of, well, we got to go to Plan C, with horrific consequences. And so that's when that happened. So now Catherine the Great is in a similar situation, but obviously beforehand. She annexes the territory, and now she's stuck with all these Jews. The people of Russia didn't want the Jews, for sure. Nobody did. Why? The Jews of Poland were they educated and wealthy? Not even close. They were poor, uneducated people. They were real peasants. Why do you want to take in the lowest of the low into your country? Look, in many ways, we are grappling with similar problems right this second, right? When we're talking about immigration, when people who want to come here, and the decisions that are made in the government about, well, let's extend visas to the people from wealthy countries who have a lot of education, who can jump right into the technical fields in the United States and help our productivity, jump on the computers, the highest educated, the best. But those who come in who are not educated, who are poor, do we let them in too? I don't want to turn this into any kind of referendum on politics or immigration. I just want to say, look, this is the same situation we have right this second. It's the same situation throughout history, right? Same thing with Ellis Island at the turn of the century. Who are we letting in? How many are we letting in? So Catherine the Great inherits these Jews. And her solution is, you're not coming into Russia. We're going to confine you to an area. And the area is later renamed by Nicholas I as the Pale of Settlement. And Nicholas I, you'll recall, is who? What does Nicholas I do? They were already Jews in Russia at the time of Catherine the Great, but she pushes them out. She doesn't want Jews in Russia territory proper. Nicholas I. Okay, let's go back so let's think for a second. Who's Nicholas II? Nicholas II is Nicholas and Alexandra, right? They are the Romanovs. They are he is the last Tsar of Russia. He is taken to Ekaterinburg, and the family is executed. And then Lenin steps in the Russian Revolution. That's Nicholas II. Nicholas I is responsible for what terrible policy towards Jews? Conscription into the army for 25 years of Jewish males. The children are taken into the army for 25 years, and they are inducted into Orthodox Russian Christianity. And Nicholas I comes right after. I don't have Nicholas I's years, but if anyone wants to look that up, he comes on the heels of Catherine the Great, 1791, 18 something. Say again? Did Nicholas I carry out pogrom? They all carried out some kind of. Nicholas I wasn't known for like many pogroms, but he was not a friend of the Jews in any way. His son Alexander is better. Alexander is better, is more friendly to Jews. So Catherine the Great inherits this. She pushes Jews out of Russia. She establishes this area, and Jews have to live there. Now, contrary to what we might think, Fiddler on the Roof, this is the area we're talking about and the time period we're talking about. The Pale of the Settlement wasn't only Jews. It was lots of other poor people as well. These were poor merchant shanty towns. The kind of life you see in Fiddler on the Roof is in fact what was going on in some Jewish communities, for sure. Shtetls. But there were also other people in the Pale of Settlement, for sure, not just Jews. The Pale of Settlement exists all the way until when? Do we know? World War I. World War I. Why would the Pale be gone after World War I? Okay, the Russian Revolution happened right after, but even a little bit before that, the Russian Empire collapses, right? The armies move and they destroy the Pale of Settlement. The movements of the army destroy the Pale of Settlement, so it no longer exists. Yes. Yes, go for it.
World War I, the Russians were on the losing side and they were beaten to death. Sorry about that. World War I, the Russians.
Tienes que hablar más fuerte.
I'm sorry?
Tienes que hablar más fuerte.
I'm sorry.
Tienes
Que hablar
más fuerte.
más fuerte. Oh, sí, entiendo. Okay. I thought you were talking English and I didn't compute. My bad. Anyhow, World War I, Russians take a beating. Russian troops run, and they ran, and what they did is ransack through Jewish communities, and a couple, three or more of those soldiers overran my grandfather's little farm, kicked to death my grandmother because she was a Jew, and they demanded jewels, which they didn't have, and my mother was a witness to that. The reason why there weren't everybody else who could ran away from the Russian troops that were running from the battle. And anyhow, I have no love for Russians.
I think I have a question. After World War I just wonder if the countries were redefined, like they were in World War II. So I'm wondering if that part of the world there were new boundaries now.
So what a very interesting and timely question. My next sentence on my notes is, the Belarusian Republic is established in 1918. So yes, absolutely 100%. Boundaries of various countries are redefined, new countries come into existence, and the Belarusian Republic is established in 1918. So now we have Belarus. Up until then, it had been part of the Lithuania, Polish United Kingdom, and then before that, the Lithuanian Duchy, etc. So, brava. Perfect question, perfect time.
The name Belarus, what it means is the white Russia.
The term Belarus, Zisel says, means white Russia.
It was part of Russia years ago
It was part of Russia years ago.
as the white Russia. why, but perhaps
So Zisel says he doesn't know why it would be termed white Russia. The only thing, in terms of white, you'll recall that after the Russian Revolution, and clearly, maybe this has something to do with it, probably not, but after the Russian Revolution, immediately afterwards, you had two armies that were fighting each other in Russia, right? The White Army, who were loyal to the Tsar, and then you had the Red Army, which was loyal to Lenin and the popular grouping. So you had the White Army versus the Red Army. Okay. In 1929, so Belarus becomes Belarus in 1918. 1929, the Soviet Union, begins to turn against Jews. You'll recall during the Russian Revolution, when Lenin first comes up, Jews aren't problematic, right? They supported it, and there was no problem. And remember that why would Jews support the Russian Revolution? We were, at that time, in that area, at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of economics and in terms of our who we were as a people. We were hated. We were at the very, very bottom. Okay, what does communism it equalizes everyone. And socialism equalizes everyone economically. So for us, as Jews, it was a move up, right? We were at the bottom, now we get to be equal with people. Great. If you were at the top, you weren't loving this. You were not loving this. People like Marx and Trotsky were Jewish, absolutely. So we were moving on up, right, to the east side. So we liked this policy, but policy turns against the Jews. And then, of course, we have World War II. And World War II was just catastrophic for Belarusian Jews. The Einsatzgruppen. Einsatzgruppen, do people know what that is? That's a name you should know. The Einsatzgruppen were special mobile squads that were set up by Heydrich and Eichmann. And if you never heard the term Heydrich was one of the most brutal, worst Nazis there was. A lot of the policies that we know of, Heydrich was responsible for the genesis of. Anyway, the Einsatzgruppen would go in after the German army would fight the troops of whoever were in the town. And then the Einsatzgruppen would go in and they would murder everyone. When you've seen these I don't even know the word. Heartbreaking doesn't even begin to talk about it. Of a whole group of Jews who had dug their own graves, and then they had to line up, and they would be shot, and they would fall into... That's the Einsatzgruppen. And they were the most vicious. Anyway, in terms of Belarusian Jews, 246,000 were executed. That's 66% of all Belarusian Jews were gone after the Holocaust. In 1999, there were close to 28,000 Jews in Belarus, mostly in the capital city of Minsk, right in the center. By 2009, there were only 12,000. We'll talk about why that is. There was clearly a move to immigrate to Israel From 2003 to 2005, there were about 5,000 Jews who left. That's part of the reason why there were fewer Jews, in 2009. In 2020 to 2021, the immigration out of Belarus had increased greatly. And then in 2022, when Russia invades Ukraine, the immigration out of Belarus increases 69%. So that these are Jews fleeing what they perceive will be a very hostile situation to them. The population, you know what, I didn't have accurate figures, but if we go from the 2009, 12,926, it's got to be fewer than that in Belarus. Yeah, yep. There is a great synagogue of Grodno, which is on the western border here. And from what I could tell, there are about 17 total synagogues, some of which have been either destroyed or abandoned or used for something else now. And of the synagogues that are active, there are, what I could tell, 4 for sure are Chabad. And my feeling was, looking at the nature of these synagogues, that they were all traditional synagogues. They were all Orthodox synagogues. I didn't see anything that was remotely close to like what we would think of as conservative or progressive, anything like that. They're traditional synagogues, and a number are Hasidic, yes.
Since 2022, when Russia invaded the Ukraine, Belarus has aligned itself with Russia and has been very supportive of it.
So Gary says, since the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, Belarus has become very aligned with Russia. We know because Lukashenko, who is the leader of Belarus, is really Putin's only ally in the area, right? And so it would stand to reason for Jews, this is not a safe place for us to be. We need to go. And so Jews have moved out to various places. Certainly they've tried to go to Israel, but other areas of Europe as well. All right. Yes.
We're going to the Baltic states in June.
Gary says they are going to the Baltic states in June.
I'm now reading a book about Baltic history.
Yes.
Many of the things that you said in your presentation are similar to what took place in the Baltic states.
Yes. So Gary said that in preparation for their trip to the Balkans, Baltics, sorry, many of the things that we have spoken about today are similar to experiences of Jews in other Baltic countries. So where are the Baltics, Gary?
North of Belarus.
Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. Those are the Baltic states. And they're very anti-Russian. Yes, they had been part of the former Soviet Union, but now they are very good. Now they are part of NATO.
I like to point out that especially Lithuania was the home of a large number of Jews, and they had a very active religious community, very learned synagogues and rabbonim, and it was like Maybe.
Yeah, I'm planning to do Lithuania next week. It has a very, very rich Jewish history. Okay, everyone, have a beautiful week. Okay, have a beautiful week, everyone. Stay dry.
North Brighton, that's 1 block east of Buena Vista, and 1 block north of Virginia. And, yeah, and my phone number is 818-433-7130. Would you like to call me? I can't right now. Call me. I hope you hear you having trouble with my phone. Okay, so don't plan on coaching.
Have a good week, Rabbi.
Hi, Rabbi. I'm glad you could change your schedule.
Yes, worked out this
Rosie was up all last night trying to figure things out. You know what? She's the right person. Trying to keep incredible energy. She never flaps.
Well, this was an easy one.
So some friends of ours are going to South Africa in June. That's where. It's their 50th wedding anniversary. So they're taking a 2-week cruise of the Mediterranean, and then they're catching a flight from Charles de Gaulle and going to South Africa for another 2 weeks.
Where will they be in South Africa?
The usual, Johannesburg, Cape Town, Cape of Good Hope. It's a beautiful country.
Yes.
We were there about 10 years ago, and our guide told us he wanted to get out, but there had quotas on it, and it was very hard for people to get out of South Africa. Yeah. Okay.
I've been waiting for Belarus. That's where we're from.
What are you?
So we're from a town near me. It's called Bohetian. And there's actually 2 Bohetians, but I don't know why, but anyhow, we're the ones from near Minsk. And we left on
my line left in the 1880s and went to Palestine. But I always wondered how did we get to Belarus in the first place. And I mean, now there's like two possibilities. I have no idea. I would guess Babylon, but I don't know. Yeah, but there's no tracing. But you know, when you talk as well, I have a copy of the Yizkor book from Turkichin, and in which they detail.
Okay.
In excruciating detail what happened in 1942. It's quite devastating. But it's not the only place that happened, but it happened.